You know, beginnings are a funny thing. Every story has to start, even if it doesn't end, and how it starts always leaves an impression on us, one that's often utilized or occasionally abused by the storytellers we listen to. Some start off slow, ramping up as we hurtle to conclusion. Others drop us in the midst of action, convince us an ending might be closer than we think. And others, somehow, manage to do both at once. Disclaimer before we begin, because I've said so before and I'll say it again, Evangelion is a show about a lot of things, and as much as I want to deep dive into every frame, it's important to remember this series is notorious for its overanalysis. I mean, this is the show featuring cross shapes people speculated on for 12 years. 12 years before director Kazuyo Shiramaki said in an interview they were included because, and I quote, "they looked cool." Nevertheless, there's more than enough intended messaging to dig into, from screen direction to color use to shot composition and even how they use telephones, so without further ado, let's get involved. Act 1 of Evangelion can be broken into 3 chapters over the course of 4 episodes, the first of which we see in Angel Attack and The Beast, or if you're translating directly from Japanese, Apostle Approach and An Unfamiliar Ceiling. The thing about these 2 episodes is, as we get into it, well, let's just get into it. 8 years ago. Wait, is that right? No? Yeah, okay, yeah, no, cool. 8 years ago, it's 2015, or 20 years in the future, if you want to think of it that way. A quick helicopter shot over the speeding water and we see buildings in the ocean, clearly a city drowned by calamity, with something otherworldly, an angel, swimming toward us. There's nothing fancy here, just effective establishing shots giving us a time, area, and sense of urgency as we're in medias res. Following the shot of the angel, Sakiel, flowing towards us from the top to the bottom of frame, we get these shots, with the angel propelling itself from the right to the left. Screen direction is a huge consideration throughout the series as a whole. The top of frame is traditionally considered the background, the bottom foreground, so we know this thing is coming towards us. How should we feel about that? Well, we know in these very next shots because while moving left to right typically signifies progression and positivity, moving right to left conveys the opposite, a sense of negativity, regression, wrongness. Whatever this thing is, it's not good. A 2012 paper from Cleveland State University proved consistency in audience perception. Thank you to Now You See It for making a video on this. And it doesn't take more than 30 seconds before we see this used again, this time on main character Shinji Ikari. Alright, now let's back up real quick, because the established space between our introductory angel and best boy Ikari is weird at best, and that's on purpose. After we see the angel and the military force awaiting its surfacing, this next shot of the drowned city pans right to left from ocean to land, and on that land I see who I assume is Shinji. I gotta say, I love the framing here. I mean, he's so far away he's barely even recognizable, and he's moving, again, right to left. If we line these shots up spatially, the way we're to understand them, we see not only is Shinji running out of frame and away from Sakiel, he's not technically in frame to begin with. Shinji isn't just to the left, he's to the ultra left, so far from the angel no one should even notice him. And yet, we do, watching him run away for the very first, and unfortunately not the last, time. We get 2 more establishing shots, this time panning to the right, before we see Misato Katsuragi as she patrols the empty city, moving, you guessed it, we're 3 for 3 here, right to left. Because the previous shot panned the other direction, however, left to right, we know Misato is between the angel and Shinji, and she's chasing after him. So to recap, we're not even 1 minute into the show, and we've established our main character is running from the monster behind him while his guardian, pursuing him, also stands between Shinji and what he fears. Impressed yet? Yeah, neither am I. Our first real line of dialogue is Misato saying she's gotta find him, a statement punctuated by this shot of the GPS, and the him is revealed by the school photo, which turns into a match cut, bringing us back to Shinji and introducing him properly as he tries and fails to reach anyone by payphone. In these 4 consecutive shots, we're shown our 2 primary characters, one neglecting her phone while searching for what she'd lost, the other unable to connect to her or anyone else. Subtlety has left the room. Turning from the payphone, Shinji sees Rei Ayanami in her school uniform across the street, and just like that, the show decides to ask questions we might never get answers to. But we'll come back to that. By the way, while writing this video, subscriber Samuel Gaspar directed me to a fantastic video from Ryan Storm fully breaking down the editing of this first episode. So if you want to see more on that front, please go watch that video. It's absolutely incredible. Anyway, cues some fantasy action and a daring escape, and the episode outlines its two plot threads: Shinji and Misato with their comical meeting and interactions on the way to Nerve, and the serious exploits of Nerve itself as Gendo Ikari takes control of the situation. As the two threads draw closer to merging, Shinji and Misato have their first genuine discussion, and we see Shinji's paternal conflict punctuated with red light. We'll go back to that too, I promise. If Shinji's face tensing up and his flashback to abandonment wasn't enough, the request letter he forwards to Misato tells us everything we need to know. The letter's been torn up and retaped, red ink scribbled all over Gendo's handwritten words, a visual representation of Shinji's fury and disdain towards his father. Again, though, there's more here than first meets the eye. The mass blacking out of the typeface across the page indicates this was a formal letter with redacted information, and my personal guess is that this is a page of the Marduk Institute's assessment of Shinji, which Gendo probably blacked out since it's considered top secret information. If that's true, however, Gendo's redaction also hides from Shinji his capability for piloting, our first example of the father's mission interfering with the son's life. Regardless of whatever this page was, Shinji saw fit to repair it and report to Gendo, signaling his first steps to repairing that relationship. Need more literal character introductions? Don't worry, Dr. Ritsuko Akagi emerges from her work, the Eva Cage contaminant fluid, to help direct Shinji and Misato. Misato points out the gruff similarities between Shinji and Gendo, which elicits a glance of compassion from Ritsuko, and this single reaction shot does more work than it deserves when you realize that glance of compassion, if it's meant to be intentional, is due to Ritsuko's own intimate relationship with Gendo. The only other character in the series to form a compassionate bond with Shinji because of his similarity to his father is, you guessed it, Rei. And thus we have the first of many comparisons between Rei and Ritsuko, which proves substantial later. Did I say Ritsuko? Ritsuko. Then we get this heck of a shot, with Ritsuko explaining why they call Unit 1 a devil, as Shinji is framed against its closing hand. Subtlety is gone, yes, but awesomeness abounds. In the iconic Get in the Eva scene, a sequence of progressively tighter close-ups escalate the tension until we get my favorite shot of the episode as Shinji faces his father. Notice, Gendo is framed both above Shinji and sealed off from him. Within the viewing port, we don't even see Gendo's entire face, as a wall of monitors displays no less than 6 identical copies of Shinji. He's a non-exclusive resource in his father's eyes. And this point is driven home when Gendo speaks with Fuyutsuki and Rei, where only one monitor switches to confer with them. Fuyutsuki and Rei are one of a kind. Shinji is expendable. When Rei is wheeled in, we get a look at Shinji, realizing that if he refuses to pilot, a girl weaker and more injured than him will have to take his place. This is enforced with the shot of her blood literally on his hands, where he determines he'll fight. Afterwards, throughout the series, Shinji insists he only fights for recognition and praise from others, but that notion is nearly out of mind here, where Shinji decides to involve himself for one reason alone: to protect those who can't defend themselves. Speaking of, I know everybody's going to say I missed the importance of Unit 1 reaching up to defend Shinji from the angel he was fleeing earlier and how that parallels Misato saving him in Atami, but, we're not going to talk about that now. We've got enough to cover, and we will come back to it, I promise. Anyway, where were we? Oh, yes. After our first epic boarding and launching of Eva Unit 1, Shinji reaches the surface, Misato hopes he survives, and bada bing bada boom, we finish our first episode. When Angel Attack first released, critics praised it for its ability to merge suspenseful action with copious amounts of information without affecting the pace of the episode. And taking a closer look, it also sets up several character arcs, most notably Shinji and his father's interpersonal struggle, obviously, but also Misato's paternal issues, Ritsuko's similarity to Rei in their knowledge of Gendo, and Shinji's role as a defender to Rei. Episode 1 is only the first half of our introduction, however, and the unfamiliar ceilings do the rest of the heavy lifting. Picking up immediately where we left off, episode 2, titled Unfamiliar Ceilings and the Beast, begins with Shinji's encounter with the angel Sakiel. Things go downhill fast, and the angel breaks Unit 1's arm. In response, Shinji's shocked expression is painted over with abstract shades of undulating red. This is the first proper instance of what eventually becomes my favorite and Evangelion's most recurring motif, the color red as an indication of pain, specifically the pain of isolation. There isn't much time to dwell on this, however, before Unit 1 receives a critical blow to the head and... In direct contrast to the chaos of battle, a series of long takes allows us to absorb the surroundings of an alabaster room, wondering, like Shinji does, how we got here and what happened. The minimal use of color here was intended to convey an emptiness as Shinji processes what he thought, is thinking, and feels. After a handful of scenes, we see Rei transported on a stretcher past Shinji. And to be completely honest, if we're looking at every frame of this series and asking, why? I honestly don't have an answer for these 3 shots. Mayhaps the sequence is supportive, letting us and Shinji know he did the right thing by saving Rei from piloting, and he's satisfied with that decision, even while still recovering from it. Or maybe the sequence is comparative, showcasing the silent understanding between the two that they now share the same position as pilots. They are mutually exclusive from the rest of the world by their experience. Or maybe the sequence is both at once. I don't know. Tell me what you think. Misato comes to fetch Shinji from the hospital after no one else does, and at the elevator they encounter Gendo. The first of many brilliant elevator scenes throughout the series, Shinji and Gendo stand off silently, and unlike their first meeting, they're both on equal footing with no barriers between them. The low shot conveys the magnitude of their disgust for each other, their emotions as gargantuan as they appear while they stare each other down. Shinji is the first to break eye contact, turning away as he always does before Gendo continues on his way, going to visit the girl his son just saved. Misato, witnessing the whole ordeal, decides to move Shinji in with her, a choice she's positively ecstatic about, but even though the prospect is a bright one, it nevertheless makes Shinji uncomfortable, as illustrated by the blinding light that promptly eclipses Misato's words. Her enthusiasm is overshined by Shinji's own doubt. Here, our second title is revealed, The Beast, although exactly what that beast is remains up to interpretation. Maybe it's the struggle of no longer being alone and learning to share space with somebody. Shinji crossing the threshold into his new home is emphasized in this shot. There's special weight on the decision to share a home with someone else, an other that Shinji has never had to navigate around, and thus, this isn't just stepping into a new life in Tokyo 3, it's stepping into his first relationship. And he isn't sure he wants it. His room is marked on a scrap of paper, impermanent, like his decision to stay as he wonders if he'll leave. And while under another unfamiliar ceiling, we're introduced to another motif, Shinji's recorder. Excuse me? It's not a record. What it? SDAT? SDA? What is super digital audio tape? SDAT. Okay. I just always called it a recorder because it has recordings. Yeah, no, it's fine. I'll call it that. Just, yeah, dude, chill. Okay, chill. Shinji's SDAT is a signifier of his state of mind. There's speculation that the track numbers reference the episodes of the series, and the tape itself is representative of his relationship with his father. I'm in doubt of that, but here all we need to know is that it's running through a track he's no doubt listened to already, just like how his brain is rerunning his first battle with Sakiel. Maybe the angel is the beast, itself a representation of fear and isolation, aiming to drive him away and kill him, like he feels Gendo has always done. We see Shinji back in the cockpit, again bathed in red and pink, even the line art of this shot miscolored as pain consumes him. Animators use CGI to warp this shot so it appears as if filmed on a wide-angled camera lens, heightening this feeling of discomfort. Nobody at Nerve is able to eject the entry plug or remove Shinji from the situation, and as the pain consumes him, the Eva awakens. Gone berserk, Unit 1 obliterates the angel with a fragment of its own body, fear destroying fear, pain destroying pain, and you have to wonder, Maybe the beast of this episode is Shinji. The angel self-destructs trying to kill him, green explosion yielding to red flames, which the Evangelion strides from, harmed but alive. Shinji has survived the pain, and when the mask sloughs off, Shinji in the Eva looks within itself. I can't decide which of these shots I love more, the wounded mecha using the building as a mirror, or the same view from within the cockpit as the eye regenerates. Eyes are of clear importance in this sequence, and the Eva's eye is green, a color diametrically opposed to red. So we can speculate here that if the color red signifies the pain of isolation, green might signify unity, wholeness, connection, which for Shinji is far worse. Forced to look within himself, Shinji blacks out in pain, revulsion, and a flash of green. A green that Misato happens to be wearing when she gets out of the bath, where she was just talking to Ritsuko about seeing Shinji as more than just a tool. Misato is attempting to connect with him, lending him praise and encouragement, an attempt at connection that Shinji is torn between accepting or rejecting, given that he's faced away from her, but wrapped in a green blanket. And that's just chapter 1. After an opening like that, how do you possibly continue a series? Well, episode 3, The Phone That Never Rings, gets to work quickly establishing what life for Shinji looks like now. Everything is new for him. He still feels alone, even when completing normal daily tasks like taking out the trash or heading to school. And this sense of loneliness and misplacement is punctuated again by composition, where Shinji is awkwardly sitting in negative space or off to the left of frame. Our first meeting with Kanetsuke Ida and Toji Suzuhara is without Shinji. He's right next to them, but he's plugged into his recorder. SDAT. Plugged into his SDAT again. He's stuck in his own head. And when Shinji opens up to them and the rest of the class about being an Eva pilot, the camera's focus shifts to Suzuhara beginning to target him, while Ida, intrigued as he is, tries to dissect him, taking notes on his laptop. Dare I point out how every laptop, the devices used to expose Shinji, is red, except for Ida's, and that may well be an error as you can see it is in the previous shot. Regardless, after outing himself, Shinji gets his face busted by Suzuhara. Not the best reward for being vulnerable, is it? When the fourth angel, Shamshell, attacks, Shinji laments his father not watching him launch into combat, and so begins his season-long battle of seeking Gendo's attention and praise. As the fight continues and Unit 1 takes damage, warning lights bathe Shinji again in red. When he notices Ida and Suzuhara nearby, however, note this shot here, where the direction Shinji is looking, at his classmates, is devoid of red. Here, the tables turn, and Shinji, previously losing while seeking his father's approval, begins to win once his focus shifts to defending his friends. And the only way to protect them is to open up to them. Literally. Within the entry plug, Ida and Suzuhara see Shinji at his most desperate and vulnerable. Misato orders a retreat, but Shinji isn't able to let himself run away again. So he arms his knife and takes on the stoic expression seen at the start of the episode during training. Misato screams again, the timer hits critical, and Shinji decides it's now or never. Going straight for Shamshell's heart, he's again in total red, enduring the pain of vulnerability, and probably the pain of disobeying orders, head on until he kills it. When Shinji doesn't show up at school for a number of days afterwards, Suzuhara is the one to notice, lamenting his earlier ignorance and how he, punched him in the face. The understanding he develops throughout this episode is actually pretty complex, as after being in Shinji's shoes, or rather his Eva, Suzuhara not only witnessed how Shinji was ordered around while piloting, his previous defense proven true by Misato's retreat order, but he sees Shinji's inner conflict between obeying orders and pleasing others, and facing the obstacles he doesn't want to run from. The next episode proves that Ida doesn't fully understand Shinji's turmoil the way Suzuhara does, which is why Toji and Shinji end up emotionally bonding through this experience. Now, without reading too much into this, what we see next is a red umbrella inside the doors of the hall where Suzuhara attempts to call Shinji. Can we assume it's representative of the pain he's putting himself through to further connect with Shinji and apologize? You can believe that if you want. watching a shot of the phone whose call never made it through, even though, somewhere, Shinji's phone finally rang. Phones throughout the series are typically red or green. Red phones used throughout NERV headquarters to issue orders and communicate pain, while nearly every other phone, a device used to connect people, is green. Japanese payphones in the 90s were legitimately green though, so whether this is just an artistic decision, a coincidence, or a reflection of reality is up to you. Also, in this final scene, it begins to rain, which sets us up perfectly for... Rain after running away is the capstone to Act 1 of the series, and possibly the most important episode. Shinji's room is properly marked with a heart-shaped sign now. He finally belongs, which is why it hurts all the more when he runs away. On board the long-running train, his recorder, SDAT, repeats the same song again. He's stuck in his head, and we know he's thinking about the events of the previous episodes. He tells himself to go back, but he can't bring himself to do so and continues running. Wandering Tokyo 3, he sees a young couple getting along in a theater, and his eyes light up, signaling his desire for human connection and touch, especially if it comes in the form of sexuality. Fun detail here, the film playing is a disaster movie about the Second Impact, which is to say it's a fictional film based on a fictional event within a fictional series about fictional events. Anyway, Shinji takes a nap in the theater, something we can all relate to, and come morning, the sky is red with sunrise. As viewers, we know at this point what red means, and sure enough, Shinji can't shake the feeling of the city he struggled so hard to defend closing in around him, suffocating him as background plates move in faux parallax to emphasize the emotion. So he gets out of the city and away from painful memories, where he ends up in the country. I gotta say, I like how the show spends a minute bouncing between Shinji and Misato, showcasing him trying to escape and her unable to stop thinking about him, which culminates in the diagnostic scene where Ritsuko is physically diagnosing Rei and emotionally diagnosing Misato. Misato's empathetic relationship with Shinji is on full display, and we'll come back to this conversation, but for now, more teen angst. In the country, Shinji runs into Ida, who's playing war for fun, in stark contrast to Shinji's very real suffering. This glorification of war is something Ida never unlearns, which is probably why, despite his earnest wishes, he never ends up piloting an Eva. Still, he and Shinji bond over the loss of their mothers, and Shinji's hedgehog dilemma lessens. Escorted back to NERV and facing Misato, Shinji ends up in a very uncomfortable situation when she forces him to choose for himself whether to pilot, instead of deferring to others' preferences. He's upset and confused why Misato isn't scolding him like a negligent parent and setting him straight, the only adult response he's used to. Instead, Misato is forcing agency upon him, and he's not used to making a decision for himself. Misato, upset with Shinji's previous and current mouthing off, assumes he's immature, self-absorbed, and irresponsible. He's unable to reciprocate her corrective criticism and doesn't understand that she's emotionally invested in him at this point. She's afraid to lose him, and she expresses her exasperation as anger. Again, the framing reflects all of this. The two are unable to connect on anything, being on two different planes of elevation and facing two different directions. Misato, when she speaks, is looking directly at the camera, at Shinji, at us, but she's blacked out and inscrutable because Shinji, again to the left of frame, never once faces her. So he runs. Leaving Tokyo 3 for good, Shinji gets intercepted by Ida and Suzuhara. And in this crucial final scene in a crucial final episode of the act, the two of them force Shinji to display the strength they know he has, which triggers him to finally admit all the flaws he recognizes in himself. They don't force responsibility on him, they encourage and support him. Shinji's finally facing himself, while punching Suzuhara, in the face, and if that wasn't on the nose enough for you, the pop song playing overhead in the background of this scene is called Face by Masami Okui. I won't read it aloud, but here are the lyrics for your leisure. At the same time this is occurring, Misato has a revelation. Now, here I want to point out that throughout Act 1, Misato undergoes her own mini 3-act journey, beginning back in Episode 2. Episode 1 is pure introduction, but after Shinji moves in with her, Misato speaks with Ritsuko while in the bath and realizes that despite the victory over Sakiel, Misato isn't happy, because through that ordeal she had to think of Shinji as a tool, which recontextualizes her wishful "don't die, Shinji" from "don't die because I care about you in any way" to "don't die because we'll have to find a replacement for you and we might be doomed." But now with Shinji living with her, Misato is forced to see the boy as a person instead of an instrument. In episode 4, we see her reprimanding Shinji post episode 3's battle, and throughout this final episode she goes back and forth thinking about him, sorting out her own emotions, and finally discussing it with Ritsuko again during the diagnostic scene where she not only admits to Shinji's humanity, but places his needs before her own. You could say Misato has gone from being in Shinji's way to stepping out of the way, emotionally speaking. This comes to a head during this final revelation, where she understands Shinji behaves the way he does, not because he is immature or rude, but because he has no experience reciprocating, expressing, or communicating his emotions, since he never had a stable family unit around him to teach him how to do so. And the worst thing she could be doing right now is sending him away from the only people willing to nurture, support, and love him. It's not enough that she got out of Shinji's way, she needs to help him find his way. He doesn't need distance, he needs a family and a mother. And she comes to this realization in the eyes of Eva Unit 1, which, if you know, is also Shinji's mother. Furthermore, she realizes this and stops moving to frame left, going to see Shinji at the train stop and looking towards the right to see him. In frame, she literally turns around. Shinji then also experiences a revelation when, after receiving encouragement from his friends, he recalls Misato's words of encouragement from the end of episode 2, the first bit of praise and support and connection he ever received from the first person to ever see him as a person. So, he doesn't run away. He makes the choice Misato gave him before, to stay, face himself, and fight for others. When Misato reaches the train station and contacts Shinji, we're treated to one of the greatest shots, in my opinion, in anime history. It's the polar opposite of their last encounter, the two of them in broad daylight, facing each other, with Shinji elevated instead of below, and he's finally, after 4 episodes of conflict, centered in frame, which is to the right of the challenge he faces. This is the first of many iconic Evangelion ultra-long shots, this one lasting 43 seconds, during which time the song Bayside Love Story from Tokyo, also by Masami Okui, mixes with the ambience of summer noise. Here, again, are the lyrics, detailing 2 lovers meeting at the train station. I've previously discussed Evangelion's use of ultra-long shots, so I won't deep dive into that here, but it's important to note exactly what this shot means for the characters involved. The drawn-out passage of time gives us, as viewers, a chance to reflect on the 2 characters and how they got here, the lack of cuts applying more and more pressure for a change, a choice of any sort to be made. It isn't just the realistic passage of time an emotionally diluted teenager like Shinji needs to formulate and vocalize his thoughts, it's enough to build anticipation for the audience as we wait for Shinji to give a long-awaited response. Most importantly, the normally outspoken Misato says nothing. She gives agency of the situation to Shinji, letting him form the first words, and the words he chooses couldn't be more important. I'm home, here, and I'm no longer running away. And she welcomes him. Then, the show begins. Enough emotional development for a whole series, you say? Absolutely. And a final point on this episode is that it wasn't originally planned. Actually, Hideaki Anno had almost nothing to do with this. Staff members at Studio Gainax looked at the story overall and decided Shinji's relationship to others needed to be more fleshed out before we continued. In other words, arguably the best episode of the act came out because Anno's audience and colleagues knew what the story lacked and were capable of providing it. Without episode 4, episodes 1 and 2 take on all the weight of Act 1 and the introduction before we hurtle into meeting our supporting cast, which is what any other show would do. This buffer, though, allows us to not only explore Shinji's emotional state, but progress it, elaborate on it. Without episode 4, there's no real explanation for the strength he develops and displays in later episodes. The act overall is a deep dive into Shinji's character, his thought process, and an explanation as to why he would possibly involve and subject himself to the pain that comes throughout the rest of the series. He begins completely alone and ends here, surrounded by everyone who's endeavored to know and support and love him. Maybe this final scene, these final shots, are nothing more than a hasty wrap-up from an episode whose studio couldn't afford to animate more frames. Maybe it's a deliberate decision to draw out anticipation and exercise audience mindfulness to secure the emotional connection we've been craving. Or maybe, if we're willing to believe creativity can overcome limitations, maybe it's both at once. And that's why, I've got to admit, I think Evangelion has a perfect first act. Thank you so much for watching. I sincerely hope you enjoyed this video. I'm glad so many of you found the previous one valuable, but this is the real start of what hopefully ends up being a full series breakdown. I know I didn't cover every detail or motif used, but I hope I was able to reveal some of the techniques Eva utilizes so that you can enjoy the show even more on your next rewatch. And who knows, maybe you'll find something I completely missed. Probably will, actually. Today's video was brought to you by our sponsor, TimberW0lf Studios. They have an arrangement of— oh wait, that's me! I really need money. For real, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to support us additionally through our Etsy or Redbubble stores. We've got tons of anime-inspired designs, and if you're broke like me, you can use code AVAACT1 to get 10% off all Etsy products. All links in the description below. But if you're just here for the neat little video content, that's cool too. I'm hoping to break down Act 2 before too long, so make sure you stick around if you want to see that. In the meantime, the support and feedback from everybody has been absolutely amazing, and I cannot thank you guys and gals enough. Seriously, it's meant the world. Until we meet again, I've been Gyro, you've been amazing, and I wish you only the best. God bless ya.